Last month, my best friend Clara asked me to dog sit for her. She has this neurotic little corgi named Pippa, who, don't get me wrong, is adorable, but also a walking anxiety disorder wrapped in fur. I've watched Pippa a couple of times before, and each time was an ordeal. Pippa hates being left alone, barks at everything that moves, and has this weird habit of eating socks if you don't keep every single door in the house shut. Clara's solution? Leave me a 14-page instruction manual, complete with a color-coded feeding schedule and a list of Pippa's emotional triggers. Normally, I just suck it up and do it because Clara and I have been close for years, and that's what friends do. But this time, she wanted me to watch Pippa for an entire week. 7 days of being tethered to someone else's high-maintenance dog while Clara and her boyfriend jetted off to Cabo. And the kicker? She asked me less than a week before they were supposed to leave. "It's just one little favor," she'd said, as if she wasn't asking me to rearrange my entire life. When I hesitated, she added, "You're the only person I trust with her," which was flattering in theory, but also felt like a trap. If I said no, it'd be like admitting I wasn't a good enough friend, or worse, that I didn't care about Pippa's well-being. I told Clara I'd think about it, which really just meant I needed time to figure out how to say no without sounding like a jerk. The next day, I got invited to a cabin trip with some friends I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't anything fancy, just a weekend in the woods with bonfires, hiking, and way too much wine, but it felt like exactly what I needed. After months of work stress and feeling generally burned out, the idea of unplugging for a couple of days sounded like heaven. The only problem? The trip overlapped with Clara's vacation. I knew what I had to do. When I called Clara to tell her I couldn't dog sit, I braced myself for the fallout. "I have plans that weekend," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "I wish I could help, but I can't." For a moment, there was silence. Then Clara said, "Plans? What kind of plans?" Her voice was sharp, like she was trying to catch me in a lie. "I'm going out of town," I said, and left it at that. Clara didn't take it well. "You're seriously going to bail on me for a last-minute getaway?" she asked, her voice rising. "Do you know how hard it is to find a dog sitter this close to the trip?" I told her I understood it was inconvenient, but it wasn't my responsibility to plan her vacation or solve her logistics. She called me selfish, and I didn't argue because, honestly, I kind of was. I wasn't going to cancel my weekend for her dog, no matter how much guilt she threw my way. By the time I hung up, she was furious, and I felt fine. Not great, not awful, just fine. I booked my spot at the cabin and didn't think much about it. The weekend was perfect. The cabin was cozy, the weather was crisp, and I hadn't laughed that much in years. On the second night, we stayed up late swapping stories around the fire, and for the first time in months, I felt like myself again. I didn't check my phone once. When I got home, though, it was like stepping into a war zone. Clara had left me a series of scathing texts, accusing me of abandoning her in her hour of need. She'd ended up hiring a professional dog sitter, which apparently cost a fortune, and she wanted me to pay her back for it. "If you'd just done the right thing, none of this would have happened," one of her messages read. I didn't respond right away. I needed time to process how ridiculous her demand was. Pay her back? For her dog-sitting dilemma? The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I hadn't signed up to be her fallback option. And if she was so desperate, why didn't she plan ahead instead of assuming I'd just drop everything? When I finally replied, I kept it short. "I'm sorry it didn't work out, but I'm not paying you back. Pippa's your responsibility, not mine." She left me on read, and we haven't spoken since. Now I'm stuck in this weird limbo. Half of me feels justified. I had every right to take care of myself and set boundaries. But the other half keeps replaying Clara's voice in my head, calling me selfish. I wonder if I should have just sucked it up and dog-sat for her, even if it meant missing out on the cabin trip. Did I put my own happiness above our friendship? Probably. But does that make me a bad person? It started with the cat. Well, not the cat itself. She's blameless in all of this, but the litter box. Specifically, who was supposed to clean it. Jamie and I had this unspoken rule. We alternated the truly disgusting household tasks. 1 week, I'd handle the clogged sink. The next, she'd deal with the leftover mystery soup at the back of the fridge. The litter box had its own rhythm, though. Jamie swore she'd clean it last, but I knew for a fact that I'd scooped it 2 days ago. We were sitting in the living room when the smell wafted over. "Ich glänzte her." She glanced at me. Neither of us moved. Can you take care of that? I asked, breaking the silence. She wrinkled her nose. Didn't I just do it? No, it's definitely your turn, I said, leaning back on the couch like I was some benevolent monarch granting her an audience. Jamie looked at me, unimpressed. I scooped on Tuesday. I smirked. Tuesday was me. Her eyebrows furrowed, and she tilted her head the way she always did when she was about to unleash her debater brain. No, I remember because I was wearing those awful yellow gloves, and I told you they make me feel like I'm handling radioactive waste. That was Tuesday. Was that Tuesday? I asked, feigning confusion. Or Monday? She rolled her eyes. Oh my God, you're impossible. And you're stalling? I shot back. The thing about Jamie is she hates being wrong, even about stupid things. I could tell she wanted to dig her heels in, but instead, she stood up dramatically, grabbed the litter scoop, and marched toward the bathroom where the cat box lived. Fine, she muttered, loud enough for me to hear. I'll just do everything around here. That was the match to the gasoline. I could feel my temperature rise as I followed her. Oh, please. You don't do everything. I vacuum, I take out the trash, I fix the broken stuff. Fix the broken stuff? She interrupted, whipping around, litter scoop in hand like some kind of weaponized spoon. You spent 2 hours fixing the Wi-Fi last week, and all you did was unplug the router. First of all, it worked, I snapped. Second, I'm talking about real things. Like when the shower head exploded and I replaced it. She laughed bitterly. You mean when you bought the cheapest one from Target and it leaks every time I turn it on? Yeah, great job, Bob the Builder. That was below the belt. At least I try to fix things instead of waiting for them to magically resolve themselves. Oh, really? She jabbed the scoop in my direction. You mean like how I'm magically resolving this right now because you're too lazy to do it? Lazy, I said, my voice rising. I'm not lazy. I just don't feel like having the same argument every time the cat takes a dump. Jamie froze, and for a second, I thought she was going to throw the scoop at me. Instead, she turned back to the box and started furiously scooping, muttering under her breath. I only caught a few choice phrases, something about unbelievable and man-child, but I decided to let it go until she said, "This is why my mom thinks I shouldn't have moved in with you." I swear, the entire world went silent for a moment. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. What? I said, my voice dangerously calm. She didn't look at me. Forget it. No, let's not forget it, I said, crossing my arms. Your mom thinks you shouldn't have moved in with me? When were you going to tell me that? It's not a big deal, she said, dumping the clumps into a trash bag with unnecessary force. It kind of feels like a big deal, I said, my calm veneer cracking. What else does she think? That I'm some kind of freeloading idiot who can't take care of himself? Jamie sighed, finally turning to face me. She doesn't think that. She just has her opinions, which you clearly agree with considering you just threw it in my face, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Her eyes flashed. I don't agree with her. Sometimes you make it hard to defend you, okay? That hit like a punch to the gut. Wow, thanks for the support, partner, I said, the word partner laced with venom. Oh, don't be so dramatic, she snapped. Dramatic? I laughed bitterly. You're the one making this into some grand statement about our entire relationship because I asked you to clean the litter box. It's not about the litter box, she shouted. It's about you always making me feel like I'm the only one who cares if this place doesn't fall apart. I stared at her, trying to decide if she was being completely unfair or if she had a point. Probably both. My brain scrambled for the right thing to say, something that would defuse the tension without admitting I might be wrong. Instead, I went with, if you hate living with me so much, maybe you should just move back in with your mom. The moment the words left my mouth, I wanted to pull them back, shove them into a box, and throw it into the ocean. Jamie's face fell, and for a second, she looked like she might cry. But then her jaw tightened, and she nodded. Maybe I should, she said quietly, dropping the scoop into the trash bag and tying it with a sharp tug. She walked out of the bathroom and into her bedroom, slamming the door behind her. I stood there for a long time, staring at the litter box, feeling like the biggest idiot in the world. The cat sauntered in, rubbing against my leg as if to say, nice going, genius. Now it's been hours, and her door's still shut. I want to knock to say I didn't mean it, that I'm sorry, that of course I care. But part of me is still stubborn, still holding on to the idea that I'm not entirely wrong. So, AITA? The first thing Karen bought when she became a lawyer was a green suit. Not just any green. It was this deep, mossy shade that made her hazel eyes look like they could cut through glass. She found it on sale at some boutique downtown, paired it with heels she got from a thrift shop, and walked into her first courtroom like she owned the place. Fake it till you make it, she used to say with that sly grin of hers, the one that made you believe she'd never lost a case. She wasn't rich then, just smart and scrappy. But by the time her career hit its stride, her closet looked like it belonged to royalty. And yet, for all her silk blouses and tailored blazers, Karen wasn't about appearances. She believed in what clothes could do. It's not about looking good, she told me once, tugging at her cufflinks before heading out to mediate some high-profile divorce. It's about feeling like you deserve to be there. She knew exactly what her wardrobe meant to her, and to others, which is why, when the cancer came, she made one of her last wishes clear. Donate it all to the shelter, she'd said. Let someone else feel that power. I was still figuring out how to breathe again after her funeral when Sarah first brought it up. It was at the wake. People milled around the living room, murmuring condolences, eating finger sandwiches Karen would have hated. I was a few feet from her urn when Sarah sidled up to me, a wine glass in hand. "Hey," she said, too casually for the occasion. "What are you planning to do with Karen's clothes?" For a moment, I thought she was joking. Who asks that at a wake? "I'm not thinking about that right now," I said, turning away, but she pressed on. "It's just, well, she had such nice things. Maybe I could take a few pieces to remember her by." To remember her. The phrase stuck in my brain like gum under a shoe. Karen had never liked Sarah, not in the sister-in-law petty way, but in the deep, fundamental sense of mistrust. She takes and she takes, Karen had said once, when Sarah had borrowed and lost a necklace Karen loved. She doesn't even realize she's doing it. So I brushed Sarah off, thinking she'd let it go. But Sarah doesn't let things go. It was about 6 months later, at our mom's birthday dinner, that she brought it up again. We were halfway through the meal, the kind of quiet awkwardness you expect when grief is still hanging around like an uninvited guest, when Sarah leaned across the table. "So about Karen's clothes," she said, voice lowered like this was some kind of business negotiation. I set my fork down. "What about them?" "Well, it's just that it doesn't make sense to give them all away, does it? I mean, they're family pieces. I'd wear them. Keep them in the family, you know? You still here, baffled. Family pieces? They're not heirlooms, Sarah. They're clothes. And Karen wanted them donated. End of story." She huffed like I was being unreasonable. "Why are you being so stubborn about this? She's gone. What difference does it make now?" And that's when it came out, the thing she'd been holding back. Karen was always so selfish. Even now, it's like she's controlling everything. It's not fair. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. For a moment, I couldn't even speak. "Selfish," I said, my voice low and steady in a way that scared even me. "You want to talk about selfish?" I pushed my chair back, standing up so fast the table rattled. "Where were you, Sarah? Where the fuck were you when Karen was dying? When I was drowning, trying to keep it together? You didn't call. You didn't visit. But now you want to play grieving sister-in-law so you can go shopping in her closet?" Sarah's face turned red, her wine glass trembling in her hand. "I just wanted something to remember her by," she said, her voice rising, drawing everyone's attention. "No, you didn't," I snapped. "You wanted something to take. There's a difference." Our mom, who'd been trying to ignore the tension all night, finally stepped in. "All right, that's enough," she said. "Both of you." But Sarah wasn't done. "Why do you always take his side?" she whined, turning to Mom. "You're always acting like I'm the bad guy." Mom sighed, the weary kind of sigh she'd been perfecting since we were kids. "She's your sister, Michael. Be kind." I laughed, bitter, hollow. "Be kind?" "Mom, she just called my dead wife selfish." The table fell silent. I glanced around at their faces, searching for someone, anyone, to back me up. No one did. I grabbed my coat and left without another word. That night, I went into the closet and started packing. It wasn't easy, touching those clothes again, feeling the weight of what they meant and what they didn't. But I thought about Karen's voice in my head, steady and certain. Let someone else feel that power. The next morning, I loaded the boxes into the car and drove to the shelter. The woman at the front desk listened as I explained Karen's wishes, her face softening with every word. "Thank you," she said, her voice almost breaking. "You have no idea how much this will mean to the women here." But I did. I could see it. Some young woman, nervous before an interview, slipping into Karen's green suit and suddenly feeling like she belonged, like she could win. It wasn't just clothes. It was armor. It was Karen's legacy. On the way home, I felt lighter. Sarah and the rest of them didn't understand, but that didn't matter. I wasn't keeping Karen's memory alive for them. I was keeping it alive for her. And I think wherever she was, The first time I heard from Damien in years, it was via a Facebook message of all things. The little ping startled me during my lunch break, and when I saw his name, I actually smiled. Damien, my older cousin. The cool one with the guitar, the leather jacket, and the stories about sneaking backstage at concerts. We'd lost touch after he moved to Seattle, and I hadn't thought of him in ages. But then I read the message. "Hey, I know it's been a while, but I need some help. Any chance I could stay with you for a couple of weeks? Just till I get back on my feet." Something about the way he wrote it, like he was reluctant, almost embarrassed, got to me. Damien wasn't the type to ask for help. I figured if he was reaching out, he must really need it. I replied immediately. "Of course. When do you want to come by?" He showed up 2 days later with a duffel bag and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The years hadn't been kind to him. His hair was thinning, his face drawn, and his once effortless charm seemed weighed down by something unspoken. Still, he hugged me like he meant it and said, "Thanks, kid. I owe you one." I made the guest room as nice as I could. Fresh sheets, a candle that smelled like cedar and vanilla. I even left a little basket of toiletries I'd picked up last minute. Damien seemed genuinely touched. "You didn't have to go all out," he said, holding up the basket like it was a trophy. "It's nothing," I replied, waving him off. "Your family." The first few days were great. Damien had stories. He always had stories, and listening to him talk was like peeling back the layers of some gritty indie movie. He told me about his band, defunct, his job in a bar, laid off, and his ex-wife. Let's not go there. He insisted he was on the verge of something big, a new job, maybe even a new band, and he just needed a little time to sort things out. I believed him. At first, Damien was a model guest. He kept to himself, cleaned up after meals, and even surprised me by cooking dinner one night. He made this weird but incredible pasta dish with anchovies and capers, the kind of thing you'd never think to try but end up loving. For a moment, it felt like having him, there was a gift, a chance to reconnect with someone I'd always admired. But the cracks started showing sooner than I expected. It began with the dishes. At first, he'd wash them, but then he'd just leave them in the sink. "I'll get to it," he'd say when I mentioned it. Then it was the laundry. He'd leave his clothes in the washer for days, forcing me to move them so I could do my own. I told myself it was no big deal. He was probably just distracted. Then there were the late nights. Damien had this habit of pacing when he was on the phone, his voice carrying through the walls. Most of the time, it sounded like he was arguing with someone, maybe a friend, maybe a debt collector. Once, I heard him yelling about a guitar amp he'd pawned. I didn't ask. One night, I came home to find Damien on the couch with a beer in hand and an ashtray balanced precariously on the armrest. The apartment reeked of cigarettes, and I could see a faint burn mark on the coffee table where he'd clearly set the ashtray down while it was still hot. "Damien," I started, trying to keep my tone light. "I thought we agreed. No smoking inside." He looked up at me, eyes bleary. "Oh yeah? Sorry, kid. Won't happen again." It happened again. The job hunt? That, too, seemed more theoretical than actual. Whenever I asked how it was going, Damien had a vague answer ready. "Got a lead," he'd say. Or, "Waiting to hear back from a guy." Meanwhile, I couldn't help but notice how often he was on the couch, scrolling through his phone or watching reruns of old cop shows. Then came the night of the party. I'd gone out with friends, hoping to escape the mounting tension at home. But when I got back, the apartment was chaos. Music blared from a Bluetooth speaker. Beer bottles and snack wrappers littered every surface. Damien was in the kitchen, laughing too loudly with a group of people I didn't recognize. "Hey, I called over the noise, trying to mask my irritation. "What's going on?" Damien turned, grinning like a kid caught sneaking cookies. "Relax, kid. Just a few friends. Thought you wouldn't mind." I did mind, but instead of confronting him in front of his entourage, I went to my room, slammed the door, and tried to drown out the noise with headphones. The next morning, the place was trashed. Damien was passed out on the couch, and his friends were gone. I stood there surveying the wreckage, and something inside me snapped. When Damien finally woke up, I laid it out for him. "Look, I'm happy to help you, but this isn't working. You're not taking this seriously, and it's starting to feel like you're taking advantage of me." His face darkened. "Taking advantage? Are you kidding me? I'm just trying to get my life together, and you're making it about you." "I'm not." I started, but he cut me off. "You think you're better than me because you've got your little 9 to 5 in your tidy apartment? Newsflash, not everyone has it that easy." I stared at him, stunned. This isn't about being better. It's about respect. For me, for my space. Damien scoffed, grabbed his duffel bag, and stormed toward the door. "Forget it. I'll figure it out on my own." He left without another word. The silence in the apartment was deafening. I cleaned up the mess, one beer bottle at a time, feeling a mix of relief and regret. I wanted to help Damien, but somewhere along the way, I'd lost sight of where the line was between helping and enabling. Now I keep replaying it in my head, wondering if I pushed too hard or not hard enough. "Ida?" The moment I stepped through the front door, I knew something was wrong. It wasn't the silence. That was normal in the brief moments before dinner. It was the way the air felt, thick and weighted, like I had walked into a room where an argument had just ended or worse was about to begin. My in-laws were seated in the living room, poised with the stiff dignity of portraits come to life, their presence always filling the house with a strange, antiquated chill. My husband stood in the kitchen, a dish towel slung over his shoulder, his hands empty. That was the first red flag. He should have been cooking. It was his night. "Hey, everyone," I said, peeling off my coat and kicking my shoes to the corner. My voice sounded too loud, like a single violin in a room meant for a full orchestra. My husband looked at me, but didn't speak. His expression was oddly blank, his lips pressed into a tight, bloodless line. My mother-in-law broke the silence. "He didn't cook," she said, her voice carrying the same kind of dismissive authority you'd expect from a news anchor announcing the weather. I told him it was your job. The words were so absurd that at first I thought she was joking. But her tone, the slight lift of her chin as she spoke, told me she was deadly serious. I laughed anyway, a sharp, involuntary burst of sound that startled even me. "You're kidding, right?" I asked, glancing at my husband for some sign of solidarity, some smirk or eye roll that would show he was still on my side. But he didn't meet my eyes. He just stood there, silent, letting her words hang in the air like an accusation. My stomach growled. I was hungry, exhausted, and not in the mood to play housewife for the benefit of someone else's outdated ideals. "I'm not doing this," I muttered, pulling out my phone. The app opened with practiced ease, my fingers flying across the screen as I ordered dinner for myself and the kids. The food arrived 20 minutes later, an unceremonious bag of takeout that I plated for myself and the kids without a word. My in-laws stayed quiet, though the atmosphere at the table felt charged, like a thunderstorm building on the horizon. My husband finally sat down after serving himself, and the silence was broken only by the clink of utensils and the whisper of takeout containers being unwrapped. It wasn't until halfway through the meal that my mother-in-law spoke again, as if she had been waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "You know," she began, her tone the kind of falsely sweet condescension that made my skin crawl. "Back in my day, women knew their place. They didn't expect their husbands to cook or clean. They found their purpose in taking care of their families." I chewed my food slowly, using every ounce of self-control to keep my expression neutral. My kids were watching, their little faces tilted up like satellites trying to decode the signals in the room. Finally, I set down my fork and turned to my husband. "Do you have anything to say about this?" I asked, my voice as calm and measured as I could make it. This was a test, and he knew it. This wasn't just about dinner. This was about us, about the kind of people we wanted to be, about the promises we had made to each other long before his parents decided to camp out in our living room. He hesitated. For a moment, I thought he would stand up for me, that he would find the courage to defend the partnership we had built together. But then he sighed and looked down at his plate. I mean, she's not wrong, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Maybe you could try, being a little more traditional. Just while they're here. I stared at him, the man I had shared a life with, the father of my children, and for the first time he felt like a stranger. My mother-in-law beamed, her expression smug and triumphant, while my father-in-law nodded silently, as if this was the natural order of things. I inhaled deeply, my mind racing. Anger was building inside me, a slow, simmering heat that threatened to boil over. Finally, I spoke, my voice low and steady, every word carefully measured. Tradition, I said, doesn't allow a man making $35K to support a family of 5. You're too broke to be this sexist. The table fell silent. My husband froze, his fork halfway to his mouth, his face crumpling with the weight of my words. My mother-in-law gasped audibly, clutching her chest like she'd just witnessed a crime. "Excuse me," she stammered, but I didn't respond. I was done. My husband pushed his chair back abruptly, standing and mumbling something about needing air before disappearing upstairs. The sound of his footsteps on the stairs echoed through the house, each one feeling heavier than the last. The rest of the meal passed in strained silence. My in-laws ate quickly, their expressions unreadable, and I focused on the kids, making sure they finished their food before bedtime. Once the dishes were cleared and the house was quiet, I climbed the stairs to find my husband sitting on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. "You let them tear me down," I said, my voice soft but firm. "In my own house. You let her talk to me like I'm nothing, and then you agreed with her. Do you even realize what you've done?" He looked up, his eyes red and full of something that might have been regret. "I didn't know what to say," he muttered. "They're my parents. I didn't want to upset them." "And what about me?" I asked. "Did you think about what this would do to me? To us?" He didn't answer, and maybe that was answer enough. We were supposed to spend the day at the theme park. That was the plan: roller coasters, overpriced churros, and screaming at the top of our lungs. It was Kyle's idea, and he'd hyped it up for weeks. Every group chat message from him was some variation of, "Guys, Six Flags is going to be epic," or "You better be ready to ride everything." He even made a spreadsheet of which rides to hit first, factoring in the expected wait times based on seasonality and historical crowd trends. It was honestly kind of impressive and a little annoying. Here's the thing, I don't love theme parks. They're fine. I'll go and have fun, but they're not my first choice for a day out. I don't see the appeal of standing in line for an hour to be flung around like a sock in a washing machine. But Kyle was so pumped and everyone else was on board, so I went along. Until the night before, when I got an email about a new art installation opening downtown. The exhibit was interactive with surrealist sculptures, mirror rooms, and some kind of immersive light show. The photos were stunning. I could practically feel the atmosphere just from the preview images. A kaleidoscope of colors, soundscapes echoing through cavernous rooms. It was exactly my kind of thing. And as I stared at the invite, a little voice in my head whispered, "Why not?" Why not, indeed? The art museum was only a 40-minute drive from the theme park. I figured I could nudge the plan without blowing everything up. After all, the exhibit was just a short detour, and it sounded way more unique than another day of screaming kids and sticky seats. Besides, it wasn't like I was canceling the whole trip. I just wanted to, enhance it, so I didn't ask. I just tweaked. The next morning, I got to Kyle's place early. He was practically vibrating with excitement, wearing a t-shirt with some roller coaster logo on it and clutching a printed version of his spreadsheet. He was about halfway through explaining his ride prioritization strategy when I cut him off. "Hey, quick update," I said casually. "There's this incredible art exhibit downtown, and I thought we could check it out before the park." Kyle blinked at me, confused. "What? Why?" "It's just this really cool, once-in-a-lifetime thing," I said, pulling up the email on my phone. "It's on the way, and it won't take long. An hour tops. Then we can hit the park after." Wait. He held up a hand. "This wasn't part of the plan. We have to get there early to avoid the lines." "There's plenty of time," I said. "The park's open all day. and seriously, look at this place. I showed him the photos on my phone, the kaleidoscope of lights and shadows. Doesn't this look amazing? It looks fine, I guess. Kyle frowned. But we're going to Six Flags. That's the whole point. Yeah, and we still are, I said, trying to sound breezy. This is just a quick stop. Trust me, it'll be worth it. The rest of the group arrived soon after, and I gave them the same pitch. Most of them were indifferent. Steph, who's always up for something Instagrammable, was all in. Matt shrugged and said, sure, whatever. But Kyle? Oh, Kyle was not happy. This isn't what we agreed on, he said, glaring at me as we piled into the car. It's just a small change, I replied. No big deal. It is a big deal, he muttered, clutching his spreadsheet like a security blanket. We drove in tense silence. The museum was stunning, of course, just as I'd imagined. We wandered through mirrored rooms that made us feel like we were floating in infinity, stood under sculptures that cast shifting shadows across the walls, and took photos that looked like something out of a dream. Steph was ecstatic, snapping pictures and squealing over the aesthetic perfection of everything. Even Matt, who's usually too cool for art, admitted it was pretty awesome. Kyle, on the other hand, spent the entire time sulking. He didn't take a single photo, didn't engage with any of the exhibits, and kept checking his watch like he was timing a hostage negotiation. Can we go now? He asked about every 5 minutes, his voice dripping with annoyance. By the time we got back in the car, the mood had shifted. Steph and Matt were still buzzing from the exhibit, but Kyle was practically radiating anger. This is ridiculous, he snapped as we drove. We wasted so much time. Now we'll have to wait in huge lines for everything. We didn't waste time, I said. We just did something different, and the park's still open. So what's the problem? The problem, he said, his voice rising, is that you completely derailed the plan. You didn't even ask us. You just decided. It's not that big of a deal, I said, rolling my eyes. We're still going to the park. Yeah, but not the way we planned, he shot back. I spent weeks organizing this, and you just threw it out the window because you saw something shiny. Okay, that's dramatic, I said, feeling defensive. Everyone else liked it. Right, guys? Steph and Matt exchanged awkward glances. Steph said, the exhibit was really cool, and trailed off, avoiding Kyle's glare. Matt just shrugged and muttered something about being fine either way. See, I said, gesturing to them. It's not like I ruined the day. We're still having fun. Maybe you are, Kyle snapped. But some of us actually cared about the original plan. At that point, I was over it. I crossed my arms and stared out the window, silently fuming. It wasn't like I'd canceled the trip entirely. We still got to the park. Yes, the lines were a little longer than expected, but that wasn't my fault. And okay, maybe Kyle didn't get to stick to his precious spreadsheet. But was that really such a tragedy? The way I saw it, I'd made the day better, more memorable. So why was he so mad? Why couldn't he just go with the flow? Even now, I don't think I did anything wrong. Sure, I changed the plan, but it wasn't like I dragged them somewhere awful. The exhibit was amazing. They'll probably remember it forever, right? When the idea first came to me, it felt harmless, even considerate. My girlfriend Sophie and I were hosting our first real dinner party, our first event as adults. After 2 years of scraping by on ramen and IKEA furniture, we'd finally moved into a place worth showing off. A cozy loft with exposed brick, big windows, and a kitchen island I'd been dreaming about since my college days. This party was a celebration of more than just a space. It was proof we'd made it. The guest list was small and curated. Sophie invited her closest friends from grad school, the ones who wore tailored blazers and could dissect wine like sommeliers. I invited my work buddies, the crew that had seen me through all the late nights and imposter syndrome. Together, it was an intentional blend of chill sophistication. No drama, no surprises, just good vibes. And then there was Scott. Scott was my best friend, a title he'd held since middle school. The kind of friend who once snuck me out of detention just to hit up a midnight premiere, who taught me to drive stick in his dad's crappy Honda, who, when Sophie and I had hit a rough patch last year, let me crash on his couch without asking for details. But Scott wasn't exactly dinner party material. It wasn't his fault, really. He was Scott through and through. Loud, brash, endlessly entertaining, with a gift for finding the line between funny and offensive and dancing right on it. He had no filter, which was great at a dive bar or a game night. But in a room full of people sipping wine and debating the ethics of AI, not so much. He'd never been a let's keep things subtle kind of guy. The last time I invited him to a work event, he ended up challenging my boss to a push-up contest and winning. I told myself this wasn't his scene. He wouldn't enjoy it, and I'd be tense the whole time, waiting for him to drop one of his trademark too much information stories. It wasn't that I was ashamed of Scott. I love the guy. I just didn't want him to throw off the carefully balanced vibe I was trying to create. Sophie agreed. He's great, but, she said, and I didn't know. We both laughed at his antics countless times, but tonight wasn't the night. So, I didn't invite him. The evening was, by all objective measures, perfect. Sophie cooked this unbelievable coq au vin, and I played a charcuterie board that looked like a spread from a lifestyle blog. Our guests laughed at all the right moments, nodded thoughtfully during the intellectual bits, and praised our loft like they were staging a real estate ad. I even managed to pour the wine without spilling, a minor miracle in itself. For once, I felt like the polished, put-together version of myself I'd always pretended to be. It wasn't until the next morning, when I checked my phone, that I realized I'd made a mistake. Scott had sent me a picture. It was a blurry shot of him holding up a pizza box in his apartment, wearing his usual backwards cap and a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Hope your fancy soiree was worth it," the caption read. Beneath that, another message saw the pics. "Next time, just tell me if I'm not cool enough to hang with your new friends." I stared at the text for a long time, unsure how to reply. He wasn't wrong. I hadn't explicitly told him he wasn't invited, but I hadn't needed to. He must have seen the post Sophie tagged me in. The perfectly arranged table, the clinking glasses, the snapshot of me, and her looking every bit the polished couple. Scott wasn't in any of those pictures, and he'd noticed. When I called him, he picked up on the first ring. "Sup," he said, his tone casual but edged with something heavier. "Hey." I started fumbling for the right words. "Look, about last night." "You don't have to explain," he cut in. "I get it. I'm not your grown-up friend." "It's fine. It's not that," I said quickly, though part of me wondered if it was exactly that. "It was just a small thing, a different vibe." "A vibe," he repeated, his voice flat now. "Right? God forbid I ruin your vibe." "It wasn't personal," I insisted. "You would have hated it anyway. Everyone was all wine and philosophy. Not your scene." "Not my scene," he echoed, quieter this time. "Right? Because I'm just a beer and fart jokes guy, huh?" I sighed, rubbing the back of my neck. "That's not what I mean." "No," he said, cutting me off again. "I get it. You're leveling up, and I don't fit in." "Cool. Good talk." Before I could say anything else, he hung up. The rest of the day, his words stuck to me like burrs. He wasn't wrong. I had boxed him into a role. The jokester, the wild card, the friend you don't bring to the fancy parts of your life. But wasn't that fair? People have their lanes, don't they? You don't bring the guy who shotguns beers at karaoke night to a dinner party with people who talk about Proust. That's not an insult. It's just practical. And yet, as much as I tried to convince myself that I'd done the right thing, I couldn't shake the image of Scott eating pizza alone, scrolling through pictures of a night he hadn't been a part of. I told myself he wouldn't mind, but clearly I'd been wrong. I'd assumed he wouldn't want to come, but maybe that wasn't my decision to make. Now I can't stop asking myself, did I protect the vibe, or did I just protect myself from feeling uncomfortable? And if I did, does that make me an asshole? I was standing in line at the DMV when I found out I was rich. The DMV. Of all places. My license had expired, and the wait was one of those epic, soul-sucking ones where time dissolves into a sticky puddle on the floor. To pass the time, I was scrolling through my email, deleting junk without a second glance, when a subject line stopped me cold. "Congratulations, you're the grand prize winner." I almost deleted it out of habit, but the sender looked oddly legitimate, so I clicked. It was a contest I vaguely remembered entering months ago, a promotion from a bank I'd opened a savings account with. I'd thrown my name in without thinking. Who actually wins those things? Apparently I did. The prize was $15 million. Tax-free. At first, I thought it was a scam, so I called the number listed, expecting some shady nonsense. Instead, I got a well-spoken representative who confirmed everything. They emailed documents. I forwarded them to my lawyer, who called me back in a tone I'd never heard before, equal parts awe and disbelief. "It's real," he said. "It's absolutely real." And just like that, my life flipped on its head. The first week was pure euphoria. I told no one except my lawyer and my cat, Bandit, who seemed unimpressed. I floated through the mundane rhythms of life with the giddy knowledge that the numbers in my bank account had gone from barely scraping by to can buy an island overnight. I slept better than I had in years. My grocery cart overflowed with name-brand snacks instead of store-brand knockoffs. For the first time ever, I didn't dread the rent. But the money wasn't what excited me most. It was the chance to do something for the people I loved. My best friend Lena, who'd supported me through every low moment with her dry wit and endless supply of bad movies. My cousin Dylan, who practically raised me after my parents passed, sacrificing his 20s to make sure I finished school. Even the little circle of friends I'd cobbled together over the years. All of us bonded by some unspoken understanding that life was hard but bearable if you had the right people in it. I spent weeks making a plan, keeping the money a secret until I had everything perfect. For Lena, I bought her dream coffee shop, a cozy little space downtown she'd been saving for years to open. For Dylan, I cleared his mortgage and paid off the medical debt that had been hanging over his head like a guillotine. For my other friends, I planned a week-long escape to Japan, all expenses covered, including a ridiculous ryokan with views of Mount Fuji and a private onsen. I wanted to watch their faces light up. I wanted to give them that. When the day came to reveal everything, I felt like Santa Claus. I invited everyone over for a barbecue in my backyard, playing it cool while I grilled burgers and poured drinks. Once we were all gathered around the fire pit, I stood up, cleared my throat, and spilled everything. The money, the gifts, the trip. At first, there was stunned silence. Then, like fireworks, came the reactions. Cheers. Screams. Lena hugged me so hard I thought my ribs would crack. Dylan blinked at me, teary-eyed, and muttered, "You didn't have to do this. You didn't have to." For a few blissful minutes, it was everything I dreamed. But then the cracks started to show. Someone I still don't know who muttered, "Must be nice to be on the list." It was just loud enough to carry. The words fell like a rock into a still pond, rippling out, warping the energy around us. Another voice, sharper this time. "So what, some of us just don't get anything?" I turned confused. It was Laura, a mutual friend I'd invited as a courtesy. She and I weren't particularly close, but she was part of the group. "It's not like that," I said, scrambling. "I didn't think you'd want—" "Oh, so you thought about it," she interrupted, her tone icy, "and decided I didn't matter enough." "Got it." The mood curdled. Someone else chimed in, joking but not really. "I guess paying off my student loans would have been too much." Another bolder said, "You could have split it evenly, you know. That would have been fair." I tried to explain. The gifts weren't about money. They were about love. They were personal, thoughtful. But that logic didn't land. It didn't matter that I'd poured my heart into these decisions. All they saw was the bottom line. $15 million divided unevenly. The real gut punch came from Dylan. He pulled me aside toward the end of the night, away from the simmering tension. "Look," he said, hesitant, "I appreciate what you did. I do. But a mortgage and some bills? That's it? After everything I've done for you?" His words left me hollow. I wanted to scream that I'd thought this was enough, that no amount of money could repay the years he gave up for me. But he walked away before I could muster a response. The Japan trip fell apart within days. People who initially screamed with joy started making snide comments about the itinerary. Someone argued about flights. Another asked if they could bring a +1, then got angry when I said no. Lena, my rock, pulled back without explanation. She still took the coffee shop, but her usual texts grew sparse and formal, like I'd shifted from friend to benefactor. It was like throwing money into a fire. The more I gave, the less warmth it created, until all that was left was smoke and ashes. And now, I sit here alone with Bandit, wondering if I miscalculated everything. Should I have kept it quiet? Spread it thinner? Done more? Done less? I thought money could amplify love. Instead, it seems to have distorted it, twisted it into something unrecognizable. So here I am, Asking the universe? Or maybe just you? AITA? The knock on the door was too soft to be Rachel's usual hammering, but too persistent to be anyone else. I hesitated, dish towel still in hand, and opened it to find her standing there, cradling a cardboard box like it was her life savings. "You're my last hope," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I swear, if you say no, I might actually explode." Rachel. "Good to see you too," I said, closing the door. "What's in the box?" She set it on the counter with a dramatic sigh. "Scones. You like scones, right? Or are you on one of those weird no-carb things again?" I narrowed my eyes. "Rachel, why do you have bribe scones?" Her face cracked into a sheepish grin. "Okay, look, I'll cut to the chase. I need you to take Frankie for a few days." Frankie, her ancient, surly pug with a tendency to drool on anything soft and bark at his own reflection. "I what?" I sputtered, already feeling my chest tighten. "Why?" "I'm going to New York for that art installation gig I told you about," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "It's a huge opportunity, but the gallery's putting me up in this tiny shared space, and they don't allow pets." "Rachel," I said slowly, "you hate shared spaces." "Not as much as I love my career," she shot back. "Look, it's just 5 days. You've got that nice backyard, and Frankie loves you." "Frankie does not love me. Frankie tolerates me, which is the same way he feels about most humans except Rachel." "I can't," I said, taking a step back like I needed the extra distance to defend myself. "I'm sorry, but this week's insane. Clara's got the school play, Oliver's birthday party is on Saturday, and my boss is already breathing down my neck about the quarterly review. I don't even have time to sleep properly, let alone care for a dog." Her face fell, and for a moment I saw a flicker of desperation before she masked it with an incredulous laugh. "Seriously? You can't manage a tiny pug for 5 days? You have a whole husband and 2 kids to help out." "Exactly," I said. "That's why I can't take Frankie. We're already drowning, Rachel. Last week, I forgot to pack Oliver's lunch, and he had to eat a granola bar and string cheese from the school's lost and found stash." "Maybe you'd manage better if you didn't overthink everything," she snapped, crossing her arms. "Frankie's easy. He sleeps like 20 hours a day." "Rachel," I said, exhaling, "this isn't about Frankie being difficult. It's about me being stretched too thin." "Oh, come on," she said, her voice rising. "You always say that, but you still find time to make handmade Pinterest birthday decorations and bake gluten-free cupcakes for Clara's class." "Because that's for my kids," I said, my voice sharpening. "Rachel, you're my best friend, and I love you, but I can't set my life on fire to solve your emergencies." Her eyes narrowed, and I saw the shift, her walls going up. "Right," she said. "I get it. You're busy. You're always busy. Must be nice to have the luxury of turning people away when it's inconvenient." "That's not fair," I said, frustration prickling under my skin. "Do you know how many times I've had to say no to things I care about because of this chaos? I'm drowning too." She picked up the box of scones, hugging it to her chest. "You know what? Forget it. I'll figure something out like I always do." "Rachel." "No," she said, shaking her head. "It's fine. I get it." And just like that, she was gone. The door clicked shut, and the house felt quieter, heavier, like the air had changed in her absence. The kids burst in a few minutes later, dragging backpacks and shoes across the floor. Clara was talking a mile a minute about her costume for the play, while Oliver was arguing with his reflection in the microwave. I leaned against the counter, the scene unfolding around me, but all I could think about was the look on Rachel's face as she left. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat on the couch scrolling mindlessly through my phone. I opened Rachel's text thread, hovered my thumb over the keyboard, then put the phone down again. What would I even say? That I was sorry? That I wished I could do more? That I hated feeling like the villain in her story? Mark sat down beside me, handing me a mug of tea. "What's wrong?" he asked, because of course he could see it all over my face. "Rachel asked me to watch Frankie," I said. I told her no. He nodded slowly, waiting for more. "She was pissed," I said. "And honestly, I don't blame her." Mark tilted his head. "Do you think you should have said yes?" "I don't know," I said honestly. I hate that she thinks I don't care. I care so much. but I can't keep saying yes to everything. Mark sipped his tea, then set the mug down on the table. You're a good friend, but you're also human. You can't pour from an empty cup. The words were kind, but they didn't erase the knot in my stomach. I picked up my phone again and finally typed out a message. I'm sorry I can't do more right now. I love you, and I'm here if you need help figuring things out. She didn't respond until the next morning. When my phone buzzed, I opened her reply with shaky hands. It's okay. I was just overwhelmed. I found someone to take Frankie. Good luck with everything this week. I stared at the screen for a long time, rereading the message. Her words were polite, almost too polite, like she was holding back the sharp edges of how she really felt. And I wondered, was I a bad friend for drawing the line? Or was I finally learning how to protect myself? I keep replaying the conversation, searching for a better version of how it could have gone, but I still don't know if there is one. So, it started with the lemons. One morning, as I stepped outside to leave for work, I found a bright yellow lemon sitting neatly in the middle of my doormat. No note, no explanation, just a lemon. At first, I figured it was some neighborhood kid playing a joke, but the next day, there were 2 lemons. And then 3. By the end of the week, my doormat looked like a fruit stand. It wasn't until I caught my neighbor, Charlotte, standing at her window, watching me with an unreadable expression, that I realized this wasn't random. It was her. Charlotte lived directly across the hall. Late 50s, gray hair twisted into an austere bun, and a face carved from pure disdain. We'd barely spoken since I moved in 6 months ago, but it was clear she didn't like me. I was too loud, too messy, too alive for her liking. But the lemons? That was a new level of weird. I tried ignoring it. I figured if I didn't react, she'd lose interest. But no, Charlotte doubled down. The lemons began arriving pre-cut, the juice dripping ominously onto my welcome mat. Once, she left an entire lemon tree sapling in a terracotta pot, the roots wrapped in a black ribbon. It was oddly beautiful, but I wasn't about to play along. I left it outside her door with a sticky note that said, "Not interested in your produce." The next morning, I found the sapling back on my mat, this time with a new note. "Maybe you should learn to grow something." That's when I snapped. I started playing music in the evenings, loud enough to hear through the walls, but not so loud that she could report me. Nothing obnoxious, just upbeat pop songs I knew she'd hate. She responded by cranking up her TV, blasting a 24-hour news channel that seemed to feature only grim headlines and shouting pundits. The building echoed with the chaos of our sound war. One day, as I passed her in the hallway, I decided to confront her. "Hey, Charlotte," I said, forcing a smile. "What's with the lemons?" Her expression didn't budge. "Cleanses negative energy," she said simply, as though it were obvious. "Right. But why are you leaving them for me?" She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Because you need it." The sheer audacity of her tone left me speechless. I stood there, slack-jawed, as she brushed past me, carrying a canvas tote filled with, you guessed it, more lemons. That night, I decided to escalate. I snuck down to the grocery store and bought a bulk bag of oranges. If lemons were her weapon of choice, oranges would be mine. I started leaving them on her doormat, one by one, every morning before she woke up. At first, she didn't react. Then, after about a week, I opened my door to find an orange on my mat. But this one had a face drawn on it in black marker. A smug little smirk. I couldn't prove it was her, but I knew. Charlotte had declared herself queen of passive aggression, and I was her unworthy challenger. The tension spilled into our shared spaces. In the laundry room, she started taking my clothes out mid-cycle to make room for hers, leaving my damp shirts in a sad heap on the counter. I retaliated by accidentally unplugging her dryer mid-load. She began timing her mail pickups to coincide with mine, glaring at me from behind her oversized sunglasses as I sifted through junk mail. I started leaving my trash bag by the door for a few extra hours, just to see her wrinkle her nose as she passed. Then came the lemons again, but this time, they weren't on my mat. They were inside my apartment. I found the first one on my kitchen counter, sitting there like it belonged. I lived alone, and the door had been locked. For a moment, I wondered if I'd lost my mind. But then I noticed the faint scent of lemon oil in the air, and I knew Charlotte had been inside. That night, I installed a cheap security camera I bought online, angling it to cover my front door. I didn't think she'd be stupid enough to try again, but sure enough, the next morning, there she was. At 3:14 a.m., Charlotte appeared in the frame, creeping across the hall in her bathrobe, clutching a single lemon. She knelt down, placed it on my mat like it was an offering to some pagan god, and shuffled back to her apartment. I confronted her the next day, armed with the footage. "Charlotte, this is insane. You can't just break into people's homes or stalk them with lemons." She looked at me, completely unfazed. "If you didn't have so much negativity, I wouldn't have to." "Oh, come on," I started, but she cut me off. "You'll thank me someday," she said, and walked away. I thought about reporting her, but something about the whole thing was so absurd, so ridiculous, that I couldn't bring myself to involve the authorities. Instead, I decided to hit her where it hurt. I bought a fake "No Lemons Allowed" sign online and stuck it on my door. It was petty, yes, but also deeply satisfying. The next morning, my sign was gone. In its place was a single lemon, with the words "Nice try" carved into the rind. This is where things stand now. Every time I think about taking the high road, I remember the look on her face when she told me I needed her lemons. I've started eating oranges on my balcony just to make a point. She started watering the hallway plants extra loudly. Sometimes, I catch her muttering as she passes my door, and I'm pretty sure she's cursing me. And yet, despite all of this, I can't help but feel entertained. Is it possible to hate someone and also kind of respect them for being so committed to the bit? Am I the problem for letting this nonsense spiral out of control? Or is Charlotte truly the villain here? The thing about a guitar pick is it's small, insignificant, a piece of cheap plastic that costs a few bucks at most. That's what I told myself when I took it off the shelf in my brother's room. He wasn't home, and I was halfway through teaching myself a song that required finger-picking precision I just didn't have. My own picks had somehow vanished into the Bermuda Triangle that is my desk, so when I saw Will's stash sitting there in a neat little tin, I figured, why not? Will's a musician, or at least he fancies himself one. His room is like a shrine to his rock star dreams. Guitars hung on the walls, amps stacked in the corner, posters of bands I've never heard of plastered everywhere. I knew he'd notice if I messed with the guitars or the pedals, but the pick? It was just one. He had a dozen more, and I put it back before he even knew it was gone. Or so I thought. That night, he came home from band practice in his usual whirlwind of leather, cologne, and the faint smell of cigarette smoke. I was in my room, headphones on, scrolling mindlessly through my phone, when he burst through the door like a SWAT team raiding a hideout. "Where is it?" he barked. I blinked at him. "Where's what?" "My pick," he said, holding up the tin like it was evidence in a courtroom. "The blue one." "Where is it?" It took me a second to even remember I'd borrowed it. "Oh, yeah, it's on my desk. I was going to put it back." His eyes narrowed. "You took my pick?" Without asking. "It's just a pick, Will," I said, already annoyed by his tone. "Chill out." "It's not just a pick," he snapped, storming over to grab it off my desk. "Do you have any idea how long I've had this? How many gigs I've played with it? You can't just take my stuff like that." I rolled my eyes. "Come on, man, it's not like I broke it. You're acting like I stole your car." "That's not the point," he shouted, holding the pick like it was a diamond. "It's about respect. You don't take someone's things without asking, especially not something important." "Important?" I scoffed. "It's a $2 piece of plastic, Will. I wasn't using it to dig a hole or anything. I was playing a song." "It's not about the money," he said, his voice rising. "It's about what it means. This pick, this exact pick, was with me at my first gig. My first solo. It's been with me for years. He stopped, shaking his head. "You wouldn't get it, because it's ridiculous." I shot back, standing up now. "You're making a huge deal out of nothing. It's not like I knew it was your sacred totem, or whatever." "You shouldn't have touched it at all," he said, pointing a finger at me. "This isn't the first time you've pulled something like this." "What are you talking about?" "Oh, let me think." He started ticking off his fingers. "My headphones, my pedals, my jacket. You just take whatever you want and think it's fine." "Those were completely different," I argued. "And besides, I always give your stuff back. It's not like you're perfect either, Will. How many times have you eaten my snacks or used my charger? That's not the same thing, he snapped. Oh, isn't it? I folded my arms. Because to me, it sounds like you're just mad I borrowed something without giving you a gold-plated apology first. It's not borrowing if you don't ask, he shouted, his face red now. It's stealing. Stealing? I laughed bitterly. Jesus, Will, you're acting like I robbed a bank. Get over yourself. His jaw tightened, and for a second, I thought he might actually throw the pick at me. Instead, he turned on his heel and stormed out, slamming the door so hard my lamp wobbled. I figured that was the end of it. He'd stew for a while, then get over it like he always did. But he didn't get over it. The next morning, I woke up to find my guitar missing. My heart sank as I tore through my room, then the house. Finally, I found it in the garage, leaning against the wall in a dark corner, completely detuned. When I confronted Will, he didn't even try to deny it. Oh, I borrowed it, he said with a smirk. Hope that's okay. You detuned it? I yelled. What the hell, Will? I needed it for a project, he said, mimicking air quotes. What's the big deal? It's just a guitar, right? Are you serious? I was shaking now, clutching the neck of my poor, out-of-tune instrument. That's not the same thing, and you know it. No, it's exactly the same, he said. You didn't care about my pick. Why should I care about your guitar? I stared at him, speechless. You're insane, I said finally. You've completely lost it. No, he said, his voice calm now, almost smug. I just wanted you to understand what it feels like when someone disrespects something you care about. Well, congratulations, I snapped. You made your point. Are you happy now? Not really, he said, brushing past me. Because you still don't get it. We haven't spoken much since. He's been giving me the silent treatment, and honestly, I'm fine with it. I'm still furious about what he did to my guitar, but every time I think about apologizing just to make peace, I stop myself. Why should I? He's the one who escalated this into a full-blown war over a stupid pick. But then again, maybe I was in the wrong first. Maybe I shouldn't have touched it without asking. I don't know. At this point, it feels like we're both just digging our heels in, too stubborn to admit fault. The conversation started innocently enough, the kind you don't expect to grow legs and start sprinting toward an existential reckoning. It was a Tuesday night, and Taylor and I were sitting on the couch, scrolling mindlessly on our phones, when they turned to me and said, "You know what would make this place feel more like home? A pet." I looked up intrigued. Yeah? What kind of pet? I'm thinking a cat, they said with the nonchalance of someone who didn't just throw a grenade into the room. A cat. I said, like the word itself was suspicious. What are we going to do with a cat? Love it. Taylor raised an eyebrow, as if to say, what kind of question is that? Sure, but I was thinking more like a dog. I grinned, already picturing it, a big, scruffy mutt bounding through the park, tail wagging like a flag in a windstorm. The kind of dog that turns every walk into an adventure. You know, something with energy, personality. Taylor gave me a look. The kind of look that's half bemusement, half I can't believe I live with you. Dogs are chaos, they said. Cats are low maintenance. Chill. They add to your life without demanding your soul. Dogs are fun, I countered. You can actually do things with them. They're companions, not just decorations that occasionally move. And cats aren't just decorations, Taylor shot back. They're comforting, peaceful, like living art. Art that pees in a box, I said. Taylor rolled their eyes, but they were smiling. For the next week, we tossed the idea back and forth like a hot potato neither of us wanted to drop. At first, it was playful, each of us pitching our preferred animal-like candidates in an election. Taylor showed me videos of cats doing graceful cat-like things, slinking along fences, batting at strings, curling into perfect little donuts of fur. I countered with clips of dogs frolicking in lakes, bounding through meadows, and in one particularly compelling video, heroically saving a toddler from falling down the stairs. Okay, Taylor said one night, leaning against the kitchen counter. Let's get serious. Why do you want a dog so badly? I shrugged, trying to play it cool. I just think they're more interactive. Like when I picture us with a dog, I see us hiking, camping, playing fetch, building memories. Taylor nodded thoughtfully. And you don't think you can build memories with a cat? Not the same way, I said. Cats are more, I don't know, independent. They don't need you. Exactly, Taylor said, their eyes lighting up like I'd just proven their point. Cats don't need you. They want you. When a cat chooses to sit in your lap, it's because it wants to, not because it feels obligated. That's love. I blinked at them, momentarily caught off guard. Okay, fine, but what about loyalty? You'll never see a cat run to the door, losing its mind with excitement, just because you came home. Because cats are emotionally stable, Taylor said. Dogs are like needy toddlers with fur. We both laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that masks a stalemate. The kind that says, we are very different people. The next day, Taylor texted me a photo of a gray tabby kitten, its tiny face tilted inquisitively toward the camera. This could be us, the caption read. I texted back a picture of a golden retriever puppy with floppy ears and soulful eyes. But why would you settle for this when you could have this? The gift started soon after. I sent one of a dog gleefully chasing its tail. Taylor replied with a cat knocking a glass off a table with the precision of a surgeon. Neither of us would admit it, but the debate was getting serious. This wasn't just about a pet. It was about how we saw the world. On Saturday, we decided to go to an animal shelter. Just to look, Taylor said. I agreed, though secretly I was convinced this was my chance to win them over. Surely, the second they saw a dog wagging its entire body with joy, they'd forget all about their snooty cat dreams. We walked through the shelter like diplomats in hostile territory, each of us scouting for allies. I stopped in front of a pen with a scrappy terrier mix that looked like it had just auditioned for a dog food commercial. Hey there, buddy, I cooed, reaching through the bars. The dog licked my fingers enthusiastically, and my heart swelled. This is it, I thought. This is the one. Meanwhile, Taylor had gravitated toward a sleek black cat lounging in the corner of its cage, its green eyes half closed in a state of perpetual judgment. Look at this beauty, they whispered. So elegant, so mysterious. The cat flicked its tail lazily, as if to say, yes, admire me. You're welcome. Elegant, I muttered. It looks like it's plotting your murder. And your dog looks like it's auditioning for a toothpaste commercial, Taylor shot back. We didn't adopt anything that day. On the way home, we argued about which animal would actually fit into our lives. Taylor pointed out that a dog would mean rearranging our schedule, committing to walks and training and vet visits. Do you really want to be that tied down? They asked. And I fired back that a cat would just sit there, quietly judging us, while offering zero emotional support. What's the point of a pet if it doesn't make you feel loved? Taylor sighed. Cats do make you feel loved. They just don't wear it on their sleeves. It's subtle. Dogs don't have sleeves, I said. They're too busy being awesome. By the time we got home, we were both exhausted. The conversation had moved past practicality and into the realm of something deeply personal. Taylor finally sat down and said, Okay, real talk. Why do you really want a dog? I hesitated, then admitted, when I was a kid, I always wanted a dog, but my parents wouldn't let me. Too much work, they said. So I promised myself that when I grew up, I'd finally get one. It's like a dream I've been carrying around forever. Taylor's expression softened. I get that, they said. For me, it's the opposite. My family had a cat when I was a kid, Milo. Whenever I was upset, he'd come sit with me, purring like he was trying to calm me down. I missed that quiet, steady comfort. And there it was. This wasn't just about dogs versus cats. It was about who we were, what we needed, and the little ghosts of our past that still lingered. We haven't decided yet. Some nights, I lie awake imagining the sound of paws skittering across the floor, the wag of a tail greeting me at the door. Other nights, Taylor looks wistfully at the empty windowsill and says, a cat would look perfect there. We want to make each other happy, but how do you choose between two versions of happiness? The day I realized Ella had a vendetta against my laundry bag was the day she stormed into my dorm with a textbook tucked under her arm and disdain written across her face. She flopped onto my bed, pointed at the neatly packed blue canvas bag by the door, and said, You know, that thing's starting to feel like a third roommate. I raised an eyebrow. The laundry bag? What did it do to you? It's just so excessive, she huffed. You're paying someone to wash your socks. Do you even hear yourself? I rolled my eyes. It's not about the socks. It's about convenience. Ella muttered something under her breath about the downfall of society, and I let it go. Everyone has their quirks, I figured. Hers just happened to be an inexplicable hatred of professional laundry services. But the comments kept coming week after week, and they weren't just casual observations. They were critiques. Snide little jabs, each sharper than the last. Must be nice to throw money at problems instead of solving them, she'd say. Or, if only there were a machine you could use to wash clothes yourself. Oh wait, it wasn't funny anymore. It felt personal, like she was attacking me for something that had nothing to do with her. Still, I tried to brush it off. I told myself she was just jealous or stressed or, I don't know, bored. But deep down, the constant remarks were starting to sting. The breaking point came on a random Tuesday night. Ella had stopped by to borrow a notebook and, as usual, spotted the laundry bag. She didn't even say hi before launching into her usual tirade. You know, it's honestly kind of gross. Paying strangers to touch your clothes? Do you even know what kind of people work those jobs? I froze. My first instinct was to laugh. What kind of logic was that? But the heat rising in my chest turned into something colder. You really want to go there? I said, my voice sharp. Because I'm pretty sure the only reason you care so much is because you can't afford it. The words hung in the air like a slap. Ella blinked, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't decide whether to yell or cry. Finally, she settled on a bitter laugh. Wow, she said, grabbing her bag. Guess I'll leave you and your precious laundry bag to your privilege. Have fun. She was gone before I could respond. The door clicked shut, and the silence that followed was deafening. I sat there for a long time, replaying the conversation in my head, trying to convince myself I'd been justified. She'd pushed me, right? She deserved it. But no matter how many times I turned it over, the guilt gnawed at me like a splinter buried too deep to remove. The next few days were awkward. Ella stopped coming around, and our mutual friends noticed. What happened between you two? One of them asked over lunch. I shrugged, mumbling something about a disagreement, but the question stayed with me. What had happened? It wasn't just about laundry. It was about something bigger, something I hadn't bothered to understand. That Friday, I ran into Ella at a late-night campus event. She was standing by the snack table, picking at a plate of cold pizza, and for a moment I thought about walking away. But then she looked up, and our eyes met, and there was something in her expression that stopped me in my tracks. Hey, I said cautiously. She didn't respond, just crossed her arms and stared at me. I took a deep breath. I'm sorry, I said. What I said was out of line. I was frustrated, but that doesn't excuse it. I shouldn't have made it personal. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then finally she sighed. Do you even get why it pissed me off so much? I hesitated. Because you think it's wasteful? She shook her head, exasperated. No, because it's such a luxury. And you act like it's normal. Like everyone can just throw money at things they don't feel like doing. I opened my mouth to argue, but stopped. She wasn't wrong. Growing up, my family had always been comfortable. I didn't think twice about hiring help or outsourcing tasks. But for Ella, whose mom worked 2 jobs just to keep her in school, that kind of casual privilege must have felt like a slap in the face. I didn't mean to make you feel that way, I said softly. I guess I didn't think about how it might come across. Ella looked at me, her eyes searching mine for something. Finally, she nodded. Okay, she said. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, but it felt like a truce. We didn't hug it out or have a heart-to-heart, but the tension between us eased after that. The laundry bag still sat by my door, and Ella still rolled her eyes when she saw it, but the jabs stopped. Every now and then, she'd make a sarcastic comment about my bougie lifestyle, but there was humor in it now, not bitterness. And for my part, I started thinking more about the invisible walls privilege can build, and how easy it is to forget they're there when they don't block your path. Ella and I weren't the same, and we never would be. But we didn't have to be. It was enough to know that sometimes understanding starts with listening and an overdue apology. The cabin was alive in a way the city never was. The air carried whispers from the forest, and the lake gleamed like a secret under the sun. This was what my wife had been craving. Stillness. She'd been stretched too thin for too long, and this place was her cure, a retreat to recalibrate her soul. She hadn't said it in those exact words, but I knew. The way she exhaled when we arrived, her fingers trailing along the wooden railing of the porch, it was all she needed. I promised myself I'd protect that peace. I didn't expect the promise to be tested so soon. It began innocuously enough. My dad called earlier that week, asking if he could join me for a day of fishing. I said yes without hesitation. Dad wasn't complicated. He came, he fished, he left. Simple. But what arrived wasn't simplicity. It was a caravan of chaos. Surprise! My mom's voice rang out before I even saw her. I was carrying the cooler to the lake when the sound froze me in place. Turning slowly, I saw her climbing out of the passenger side of Dad's truck, her purse slung over one arm and a bag of groceries cradled in the other. She waved as if this were an event she'd been invited to, her smile bright and oblivious. I couldn't move. It was the exact moment you see the iceberg, but can't steer the ship away in time. My dad climbed out after her, looking sheepish, as if he too knew this was going to go south, but had long ago resigned himself to his role as her enabler. "What's she doing here?" I hissed when he finally came close enough. She heard I was coming and, well, your mother. He offered a shrug that felt more like surrender. I didn't have time to respond before my mom swept past us both, headed straight for the cabin. The door opened, and there was my wife, her expression caught between confusion and dread as she watched my mother stride in like she owned the place. "Oh, what a cute little getaway," Mom exclaimed, peering into every corner like a realtor. "This'll be just perfect. I brought lasagna for dinner. It's homemade." My wife's lips tightened into a line, and I saw her grip on the book in her hands tighten. "I'm here to relax," she said calmly, her voice measured but firm. "Of course, dear," Mom chirped, already making herself at home. "Relaxation is the whole point, isn't it?" I should have stepped in then. I should have taken Mom aside and told her, gently but firmly, that this wasn't her place, wasn't her weekend. But I didn't. Instead, I grabbed my fishing rod and mumbled something about getting on the lake before the best spots were taken. Dad and I spent hours out there, casting lines into the glassy water. I pretended not to notice how quiet he was, how his glances in my direction carried a silent apology he didn't have the courage to voice. The fish weren't biting, but I didn't care. Out here, I could pretend nothing was wrong. When we returned, the tension hit like a wall. My wife was nowhere to be seen. The couch was empty, the book she'd been reading abandoned on the armrest. Mom, meanwhile, was in the kitchen, stirring a pot with more vigor than the situation required. "Oh, you're back," she said, her tone clipped. "Dinner's almost ready." "Where's?" I started, but she cut me off. "She's in the bedroom," Mom said, her lips pursed. Didn't even say thank you for cooking. Just took her plate and disappeared. "I don't know how you tolerate that." I stared at her, the words catching in my throat. "Mom," I began, trying to keep my voice even. "She's not here to entertain you. This was her time to relax. And I'm here to help." Mom snapped, her frustration bubbling over. "But apparently, my help isn't good enough. If I'd known I wasn't wanted, I wouldn't have come." "You weren't invited," I said bluntly. The words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't regret them. "This isn't your weekend. It's hers. You showing up and making it about you. It's not fair to her." Her face fell, but the stubborn set of her jaw remained. "I'm your mother. I shouldn't need an invitation." "Maybe you do," I replied. "Because this isn't about you. Not everything is." The silence that followed was deafening. Dad shifted awkwardly, clearing his throat, but saying nothing. Finally, Mom turned off the stove, grabbed her purse, and walked out without another word. Dad followed after a beat, casting one last apologetic glance over his shoulder before climbing into the truck. When they drove off, I stood there in the stillness they left behind, feeling both lighter and heavier at the same time. I made my way to the bedroom, knocking softly before entering. My wife looked up from where she sat on the bed, her book open but unread in her lap. "They're gone," she asked. "They're gone," I confirmed, sitting beside her. I told her. Her lips curved into a small, tired smile. "Thank you." I took her hand, the weight of the day pressing down on me. "I'm sorry I didn't do it sooner." She leaned into me, her head resting on my shoulder. Outside, The lake shimmered in the fading light, the forest quiet once more. This was what she'd needed all along. Not just the space, but my willingness to guard it. I vowed to do better. Not just for her, but for us. The argument started in the weirdest place. While we were both stuck in traffic, idling behind a sea of brake lights. I was driving. Claire sat in the passenger seat, flipping through a glossy travel magazine she'd picked up from the grocery store on a whim. "Listen to this," she said, tucking her feet up on the dash. "Private overwater bungalows in Bora Bora. Hammocks over the water. Room service delivered by canoe." Her voice had that dreamy lilt, the one she used when she was already halfway to the fantasy in her head. "It sounds nice," I said, squinting at the red taillights ahead. And it did sound nice for someone else. For me, it sounded a little like being trapped. I glanced over and saw her still staring at the page, a faint smile on her lips. "What if we did something different?" I suggested cautiously. "Something active, like the Alps, hiking, village, cheese fondue." Claire frowned, flipping the page. "Hiking is what people do when they're on vacation from their vacation. I'm talking about a real getaway. No itineraries, no hilaros." She turned toward me, her eyes playful but firm. "And definitely no hiking." We laughed about it at the time, but the question of where lingered. By the time we got home that night, it was a full-fledged discussion, and not the fun kind where you toss out ideas over wine. Claire wanted slow mornings and sunsets that bled into cocktails. I wanted switchbacks, summits, and the kind of adventure that leaves you sore for days. The issue wasn't just logistics, it was what those choices meant. Claire wasn't just looking for a beach. She wanted stillness, peace. She'd been stretched thin, balancing a job she didn't love and family drama that never seemed to end. "I want to wake up and have nothing to do," she said later, curled up on the couch with her tea. "I want to feel like time stops." I understood in theory, but for me a vacation like that would feel hollow. My everyday life was already too still. Hours spent staring at screens, answering emails, moving from chair to bed to chair again. What I craved was momentum, big skies and open trails, the kind of vastness that made my daily grind feel small and far away. We tried to compromise. Claire suggested Mallorca, where we could have beaches and some light sightseeing. But when I looked at the itinerary she'd sketched out, it felt suspiciously like a beach trip with a few token excursions tacked on. "How about Peru?" I countered, pulling up pictures of Machu Picchu. "You can explore the ruins and rest in hammocks, and I can hike." Her nose wrinkled. "So, basically, I can rest while you leave me to go climbing?" "That's not fair," I said. "I want to do stuff with you. Then why can't you just not do stuff for once?" The conversation grew heavier as we unpacked it. Claire didn't just want a vacation. She wanted refuge. A chance to step out of her life and into something softer, quieter. Meanwhile, I wanted a reminder that life wasn't just screens and commutes and to-do lists. I wanted to wake up and feel alive. The night we really fought, we were both tired, staring at our laptops from opposite ends of the table. Claire broke the silence. "You know what I don't get? Why your idea of fun always sounds like work. And I don't get why your idea of fun sounds like doing nothing." I snapped back, regretting at the moment the words left my mouth. Her face fell. "It's not nothing," she said quietly. "It's rest. I'm tired. Okay. I don't want to push myself right now." I sighed, guilt pooling in my chest. "I'm not trying to push you. I paused, searching for the right words. "I don't want to feel stuck. That's all." "I don't either," she said, her voice softer now. "But for me, stuck is what happens when I'm forced to do things I don't have the energy for." We stared at each other, the gap between us feeling wider than it ever had. In the days that followed, we kept circling the same question. How do you plan a trip for two people who need such different things? We tried to get creative, pitching options that might check all the boxes. A Mediterranean cruise, a road trip through national parks, Japan, with its mix of serene temples and bustling cities. But every idea still felt like it leaned too far in one direction or the other. The funny thing is, we never doubted that we wanted to go together. That was never the problem. But the more we talked, the more it felt like there was no way to plan this without one of us giving up something big. Last night, Claire pulled me outside to sit on the balcony, even though the air was sharp and cold. She handed me a mug of hot chocolate and sat beside me, our knees touching. "I've been thinking," she said after a while. "Maybe I've been too stuck on this idea of what I need. And maybe you have too." I looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" She wrapped her hands around her mug. "I think we're both so worried about making this trip perfect for ourselves that we forgot why we're going in the first place." "To get away?" I offered, though it came out more like a question. She shook her head. "No, to be together. To do something we'll remember. Maybe it doesn't matter if it's a beach or a mountain. Maybe it just matters that it's ours." I didn't know what to say. She was right, of course, but the question of how still hung in the air. How do you make a trip meaningful for two people who find meaning in such different things? Claire smiled, as if reading my mind. "Maybe it's not about picking one thing. Maybe it's about taking turns. A few days your way, a few days mine. No one gets everything, but no one gives up everything either." It wasn't a perfect solution. It still meant compromise, and some part of me bristled at the idea of spending even a few days lying on a beach. But the truth was, I loved her more than I loved the idea of any trip. And maybe that was enough. So now, the tickets are booked. A week split between the French Alps and the Côte d'Azur. Hikes and fondue for me, sunsets and seaside naps for her. It's not what either of us imagined at first, but maybe it's better this way. A trip we wouldn't have chosen alone, but one we'll remember together. Still, I can't help but wonder, did I cave too much? Should I have pushed harder for what I wanted? Or is this just what compromise looks like when you care about someone? AITA?